When you watch what I'm about to swing into here, the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, are these people proud of themselves? I know they're very giddy about scoring character assassination points or playing to the Klieg-lights and or however they seek to promote themselves. But are they really proud of what they've done or what they're doing? Does it have meaning to society in a positive way? And look at this guy, Cory Booker. He's always been one of these politicians who goes for the dramatic. I seem to recall when he was running for mayor of Newark, talked about somebody dying in his arms or, things like this. Cory Booker has a loose screw. I'm sorry, he has a loose screw. I think he's destroyed any chance of being president of the United States. He comes off like a nut, in my humble opinion. I mean, then he's going to release information, confidential information that he's not allowed to release. Then he releases it, and it turns out they already cut a deal for him to release it. They spent an hour and a half on this. The Democrats are the protesters. Now, Booker's been in the Senate, less than 2 years? Something like that? Kamala Harris, a couple of years? Handful of them. On the hard left. They have absolutely no respect for the traditions of the Senate. Absolutely no respect for the customs of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And they're applauded. They're celebrated. Meanwhile, when Donald Trump dares to tweet, he's mocked. Oh, look over there, Donald Trump. As expected, there he goes off. Oh, yeah, he makes matters worse if he would just shut up and act presidential. How about these senators? Are they mentally ill? Should they be expelled? Have we had senators like this before who disrupt Supreme Court hearings? They might as well be in the audience with the protesters. I mean, after all, they've all connived together. No, not at all. They're respected. They are the future of the Democrat Party. The young Turks, smart and sharp and energetic. Trump. Oh, he's just, a white guy, just doesn't know when the hell to shut up and get off Twitter. Cory Booker says America should reject constitutional originalism because the founders were flawed people. That's what he said in part today. IJR has it. During an over 20-minute opening statement, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey lamented over how racist and misogynist the founding fathers were. Booker's been extremely outspoken of his disapproval of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, announcing his opposition very soon after the nomination was revealed. And by the way, fundraising on it. However, in his opening statement, he addressed the fact that Kavanaugh supports constitutional originalism, which means that the interpretation of the text should not change over time. Quote, I love that my colleagues keep going back to the Constitution, but understand this. I laud our founders. I think they were geniuses, but I understand that millions of Americans understand that they were also flawed people. Booker continued with examples that he believed showed the founding fathers' prejudice. He said, we know our founders and their values and their ideals, but we also know that they were flawed, and you can see that in the documents. Native Americans were referred to as savages. Women weren't referred to at all. African Americans were referred to as fractions of human beings. As one civil rights activist used to say, constu, I can only say 3/5 of the word. The 3/5 clause in the Constitution was opposed by the slave states and pushed by the free northern states. The 3/5 clause goes to representation in the House of Representatives. It was a compromise. The Southerners wanted to count black slaves as a full person for the purposes of getting more congressional seats. The northern non-slave states said, no, you don't get to do that. to empower your political position by using slaves that way. So the 3/5 clause has nothing to do with whether somebody is 3/5 of a human being. It was a compromise pushed by the North to limit the power of the South. But Cory Booker doesn't know that. He thinks the worst of these men. Cory Booker should do a little bit of reading of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln did more for black people in this country than Cory Booker ever could. He referred to the Founding Fathers all the time. In the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, which Cory Booker's never read. In fact, I doubt any member, Republican or Democrat, on that committee's ever read. Perhaps Mike Lee and Ted Cruz, but that's it. He repeatedly referred to the Declaration of Independence, which is the founding document. The Constitution is the governing document manifested from the Declaration of Independence. And there's nothing about slaves or blacks or Native Americans in the Declaration of Independence. It's all about human beings and individuals. And Lincoln repeatedly made that point, that the men who founded this country, the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the men who fought the Revolutionary War, were imperfect men. And while they did try to address in many ways the issue of slavery, they couldn't get it done, mostly because of delegates from states like Georgia and South Carolina. So they had a choice to make. A nation or no nation. A nation or no nation. Founded on the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Unalienable rights for all human beings. They decided a nation. And as Lincoln said, read that Declaration of Independence. The founders of this country left it to their progeny, to their children and grandchildren, to fix this awful wrong. But first they had to form a nation. You read that Constitution. Read it. Nowhere in that Constitution does it promote slavery. It talks about when slavery, the importation of slaves shall end. That's not open-ended. You know, people like to point to Britain. Well, the Brits got rid of slavery. The problem was the Brits kept exporting slaves to the United States. It was big business. And they weren't the only ones exporting slaves to the United States. Slaves were being exported from Africa into the United States, from France into the United States. But anyway, I'm not here to get into all that. I would tell Mr. Booker that it's Article 5 of the Constitution. And it's the 10th Amendment, which he despises, federalism. That it resulted in the so-called Civil Rights Amendments. The Civil Rights Amendments, explicitly ending slavery, explicitly applying equal justice to all men and women in this country. Over 700,000 casualties. These were great men. They weren't perfect. But what people mean when they talk about originalism, they mean interpret the Constitution looking at its text and as the framers intended. So what part of the Constitution was the continuation of slavery intended? None. And to put a fine point on it, an exclamation mark and an underline, we got the Civil War amendments. And in order to get an amendment ratified in this country, You need 3/4 of the states. Remember states' rights? 3/4 of the states amended the Constitution. The states. Federal government can't amend the Constitution. The states amended the Constitution. So I would ask Mr. Cory Booker, if you're not an originalist, then how do you interpret the Constitution? Based on the times? So FDR was right when he rounded up Japanese Americans and Americans of Japanese descent and put them in internment camps in the central part of the country. Moved them off the West Coast. Is that right, Mr. Booker? Constitution should be interpreted based on the times. So Plessy versus Ferguson was right, because at the time, separation but equal, separate but equal was equal. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Booker? What are you saying, Mr. Booker? Do you even know what you're saying? No, you don't know what you're saying. Then they sit there, the Democrats, and say, apply the Constitution, except when we like precedent. Then reject the Constitution and apply precedent. In other words, for them, it's a blank slate. It's always been a blank slate. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
I often wonder. You achieve something that was unimaginable. You're one of 100 United States senators out of 320 million people, and what, about a half of that adults and so forth, give or take. You're a senator. You're a senator. You take an oath to uphold the Constitution. You have enormous clout. You're deciding who should or should not serve on the United States Supreme Court. You're treated with the utmost respect. And yet you trash the country. You trash the Constitution. You trash the founders and the framers of whom you know so little. Unbelievable to me that the people who are supposedly our leaders lead us in an attack on our own system. I'll be right back. I've said this before and I mean it. Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, the great Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Joseph Story, and others have said, if the United States is to fall, it will fall from within. Not from an external enemy, but from within. It'll collapse from within. The media in this country, the Democrat Party in this country, the entertainment industry in this country, academia in this country are all of one mind. The fundamental transformation of America. Their fundamental transformation of America, which is what I call progressive statism. Centralized autocratic government said to be in the name of the people. Redistributing rights, redistributing power, redistributing wealth in the name of the people. And this force and its various tributaries is what Trump is up against. It's what conservatives are up against. It's what most Republicans are up against on Capitol Hill, but they're too stupid to know it. If we are going to fall, we will fall from within, as the greats have said, because of that force. You heard Cory Booker. Progressive statism cannot coexist with constitutionalism. You heard what he said today. You heard what he said today. But it's true. That's why anybody who does not embrace the mindset of a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a Sotomayor, or a Kagan, or whomever, the face doesn't matter, the name doesn't matter, it's the ideology, is not qualified, according to the left, to serve on the Supreme Court. You're not qualified because you embrace our founding principles. You're not qualified because you embrace our founders and our framers. You're not qualified. And by the way, we have an entire political party that has as its primary issue aborting babies. Roe versus Wade. You would think Roe versus Wade is in the Declaration of Independence. You would think Roe versus Wade is actually in the Constitution. You'd think it's somewhere. It's nowhere. It's another fabrication. But the Democrats use it to get the women's vote. The Democrats use it to claim they support privacy when they don't support privacy. Democrats are in your bedroom, they're in your living room, they're in your car, they're everywhere. They're in your food, they're in your face. And you know, there are times when the government should be in your bedroom. Right? Right, Mr. Producer? Don't we have laws against incest? Well, that's not allowed to take place in your bedroom. Don't we have laws against rape? That's not allowed to take place in your bedroom. Don't we have laws against child molestation? That's not allowed to take place in your bedroom. So there's all kinds of things that actually are outlawed in the bedroom, if you get my point. But the Democrats are great at one thing, propaganda. And the Republicans are awful. Awful. Let us go to Guy, New York City, the great WABC. Go.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for taking my call. Great to speak with you.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to make a point that nobody remembers, but Cory Booker, when he was mayor of Newark, I live about a 15-minute drive from there, and he was basically handed his seat, and he had Obama stumping for him and everybody else under the sun, and he was like the next great hope for the left. And he quickly became an irrelevant zero. As far as I know, he's not even doing anything for his constituents who voted him in.
Well, I believe that's quite true. I believe that's quite true. All right, my friend, thank you for your call. Eli, Harrisonburg, Virginia. WMAL, go.
Yes, Mr. Levin, I'd like to talk to you about how I thought Ted Cruz's questioning of Judge Kavanaugh was excellent. The way that he compared him to Merrick Garland. What was it, 27 out of 28 majority opinions they agreed with. Mm-hmm. And I thought on day one when he talked about how the Democrats and all the records of Elena Kagan and Justice Sotomayor were far outnumbered Judge Kavanaugh.
Well, here, let me just tell you this. Elena Kagan was never a judge. I mean, this guy, Kavanaugh, has 12 years worth of court decisions. But look, we know what's going on here, don't we, Eli?
We certainly do. They're not going to fool us. She was Solicitor General, wasn't she?
Yeah, and she also worked for Clinton for a while, directly at the White House and so forth. So these documents that they're talking about, most of the documents are documents that belong to the Bush presidency. When Kavanaugh was providing legal advice to President Bush. That's why this president has, on a few occasions, asserted what they're calling, I guess, constitutional privilege. And the reason is quite simple. The Senate doesn't have a right to these executive branch documents. Everybody thinks, well, they're doing oversight. Oversight of what? They don't have a right to these documents, necessarily, just because they demand them. And Tom Tillis today, and we'll do some of this in the third hour. Tom Tillis today was very impressive from North Carolina, one of the few times I might add, but he was very impressive. He said, you know what? You want transparency? How about all of us? How about we be forced to give all our emails to the American people? And you know what everybody said? Nothing. Can you imagine Patrick Leahy, 412 years worth of emails where he's conniving with Biden and conniving with Kennedy and conniving with all these other guys? Can you imagine what his emails say? Oh, and Dianne Frankenfeinstein, she's been there 112 years. Can you imagine what her emails say? They do not want the same standard that they compel on other people to be applied to them. They don't want it. Anyway, Eli, thank you for your call, my friend. Will, Washington, D.C., the great WMAL. Go.
Hi, Mark.
Yes.
I've been watching these Kavanaugh hearings, and I've got a couple of observations to make that I'm sure you have considered before. But let me say what they are. Both Dick Durbin and Chris Coons have been asking Judge Kavanaugh that, or actually implying that he must consider executive power in terms of context. And they've been trying very hard to get him to agree with this, but of course Judge Kavanaugh is a very astute guy and has avoided challenging challenging them or agreeing to that. But there are several consequences of this that are really concerning. One, to consider executive power in terms of context, it violates the Constitution because laws are laws and they don't shift with the context. And the second point, it says that when laws change, it benefits one side or the other. And of course, they're not supposed to. And finally, that the implication here is that a president can be convicted of wrongdoing or incapacity with no proof or assertion by one faction or another, and thus have his executive power limited.
All right, my friend. Basically, what the Democrats are demanding is that their policy agenda and their political viewpoints be enshrined in the Constitution. That's pretty much it. And what conservatives, that is constitutionalists, are demanding is that we have justices who will actually apply the Constitution. Big difference. Thank you for your excellent call. We'll be right back.